So, good afternoon and welcome to our intern showcase. This is an opportunity for some of our Indo-Pacific Policy Lab interns at the Center for Indo-Pacific Affairs to present the research that they worked on last semester. I'm Patrice Flowers. I'm the director of the Center for Indo-Pacific Affairs, and I thank you all for coming or for watching this online. So I wanted to just say a little bit about the projects that we were working on last semester. There are two groups of graduate students who's going to present their research today. The first group worked on diplomacy and deterrence, and I will introduce, and then we will give presentations in the order that they are on the program. So bear with me. So Ashlyn Lester is a student in the Master's in Asian Studies program, and she works with a focus on South Korea. Her interest is in family planning programs during the presidency of Park Chung-hee, and for this project, she wrote a paper, Strengthening the ROK-US Alliance for Chinese and North Korean Deterrence, how the U.S. can address South Korea's population crisis. Also presenting under this diplomacy and deterrence topic is Amanda Spincola. Amanda is a student in the Master's in Asian International Affairs, or the MAIA program, with a focus on China. And she's particularly interested in maritime security, geopolitics, military history, cultural preservation, emerging nuclear technologies, and space exploration. And for this project, her paper is entitled Showing Up and Showing Off, the Importance of Perception in Deterrence. Our next set of papers are for project Flexible Alliance Networks. And so our project interns are Anita Aravena, who is in the Masters of Asian International Affairs program with a focus also on China. And she is really interested in how China engages with its neighbors through diplomacy, health cooperation, and cultural exchange. And for this project, her paper is entitled Integrated Deterrence and Flexible Alliance Networks, U.S.-China Analysis. And the final paper is by Wilson Tang, who's a Master's in Asian Studies student, and his focus is on East Asian history, with a particular emphasis on political, social, and military developments. And for this project, his paper is entitled Integrated Deterrence and the Informal Alliances. We also had a number of undergraduate interns who couldn't be with us today because of the weather, but I wanted to recognize their work as well. Amber Hall, Kelly Oshita, Macy, Mikhail Nagata, and Tuyen Taipan. And finally, we had two graduate students who worked on a South and East China Sea data set who were really documenting conflicts in those areas from 2000 to 2026, and looking at who were the main actors, who's the provocateur, how the problem was solved, and other very interesting things. And we're still developing that, and so hopefully that information will be available on our website eventually. And those interns are Audra Geertz, who's in the MAIA program, and also Kyla Anandia, who's in the MAIA program as well. So now what you're here for, the presentations by the interns of their research. And so I am going to ask Ashlyn Lester to come up and get us started.
Hello, my name is Ashlyn Lester, and my project is titled Strengthening the ROK-US Alliance for Chinese North Korean Deterrence, how the US can address South Korea's population crisis. So to introduce what I'm talking about, South Korea and the US have long held a mutually beneficial relationship with each other, but it's currently under strain with the Trump administration, and that comes from a few key issues. So one is that the US is really pushing for the Republic of Korea to become more militarily self-reliant. So they're really urging the Republic of Korea to increase their defense spending and to take on more of the burden of not only defending the Korean Peninsula, but also defending the Indo-Pacific and working for US interests in this region. There are problems though emerging with this push because of the population crisis. So South Korea's military forces are actually shrinking. And as time goes on, it'll be harder and harder for South Korea to reach these this burden sharing alliance goals that the US wants them to. There was also problems with the Hyundai plant in Georgia and ICE's mistreatment of South Korean nationals. This really angered a lot of South Koreans at home. And then there was also the constant threat of tariffs that the Trump administration placed on South Korea. President Trump and President Lee Jae-myung, though, did meet and they did agree to a lower tariff rate. But this came at the expense of South Korea pledging to invest $350 billion into the US economy, which worried many South Koreans at home, and they feared that this huge investment would tank their economy. All that said, the Republic of Korea is actually set to play a very important role, military role in Chinese and North Korean deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. So it's very important that the US and South Korea continue to strengthen their relationship. And the military importance really stems from where South Korea sits on the globe. So it's very close to both Pyongyang and Beijing. So it's very strategically important. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about the population crisis in South Korea. So for many, many years, the fertility levels have sat below replacement level. Over the past few years, they've sat at around 0.71% to 0.74%. And this population crisis has led to the military forces shrinking by 20% over the last 6 years. The BBC reported that they have about 450,000 troops in South Korea, while North Korea has supposedly around 1.2 million. So this is going to be a major problem in the future as South Korea takes on this burden-sharing alliance with the US and takes on more control of protecting the southern half of the Korean Peninsula. Also, with the population crisis, the Republic of Korea is expected to experience an economic slowdown in the near future, which will impact their ability to continue to invest in their defense at the level that the US is pushing for. And they're hoping, though, to offset these negative impacts of the economic slowdown from the population crisis by through technological innovation. So they want to expand their fields of AI, biotechnologies, and space technologies. The problem, though, is that South Korea currently lacks the professionals in these fields, and they lack an educated labor force to meet these demands. So the US can address the Republic of Korea's economic problems by providing this skilled workforce. So they can push for American students to go into fields related to AI, biotechnologies, and space technologies, and push for them to achieve a graduate level degree to fill in these workforce gaps in the Republic of Korea. They should also invest in Korean language learning programs in US universities and also reinvest in language fellowships to ensure that these highly educated students have the Korean language and cultural capabilities to be able to integrate into Korean society and also to be competitive in an already very competitive Korean job market. So by providing the skilled workforce for the Republic of Korea, it'll help strengthen the relationship between these two countries and really ensure that the Republic of Korea does not fully turn to China to address these labor shortages. The relationship between China and South Korea has been evolving, and they've been working closer and closer together. China is also developing these key fields, such as AI, space, biotechnologies, and space technologies. So it's really important that the US try to provide this skilled workforce before China does, so that they can continue to strengthen this very beneficial relationship, especially since the Republic of Korea is set to play a very important military role in Chinese and North Korean deterrence for the United States. So to conclude, The Republic of Korea plays a very important role in U.S. plans for Chinese and North Korean deterrence right now and in the future. The ROK-U.S. relationship, though, has been under strain with the current Trump administration, from the issues with the Hyundai plant, the threats of tariffs, and the push for military self-reliance from Korea. And so to fix this relationship, the U.S. can really address the worries of an economic slowdown by providing the skilled workforce that South Korea really needs. And this will also help them continue to invest into their defense spending and offset the military problems of the population increasing. And these are my sources, and thank you guys so much for listening.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amanda Spancola, and I'll be presenting on my paper, Showing Up and Showing Off, the Importance of Perception in Asia-Pacific Deterrence. I can click, no? There we go. A brief agenda introducing what aspects of deterrence I'll be looking at, as well as my thesis, doing some racial examples, and finally concluding remarks. Introduction. I want to discuss some factors that impact deterrence and how I will be exploring them in my paper. For example, how credibility affects deterrence. Deterrence works when the potential costs of challenging the status quo are deemed higher than the cost of accepting it. Deterrence fails when defenders of the status quo experience disconnect and dissonance between their genuine and perceived perception of their ability to deter status quo challengers. This dissonance results from a misperception of credibility. When a country loses credibility, it loses its ability to meaningfully deter. Another factor that impacts deterrence is perception. While a country might believe itself to be showing restraint, subtlety, and unwavering commitment, a challenger could perceive weak leadership, wavering resolve, and a hypocritical say-do gap. As George and Simmons argued in their 1971 paper on crisis management and deterrence theory, if a policy is to have a desired impact on its target, it must be perceived as it is intended. It doesn't matter what you, the policy creator, thinks if the people you're writing the policy for don't believe that to be true, or don't see it to be true based on your actions. A country perceived as having a discrepancy between its rhetoric and its actions is especially dangerous, as it affects its relationship with fellow defenders, which is vital in the Asia-Pacific for the US and our allies and partners to deter or meet any potential challengers. My paper will be examining the perceived credibility of status quo defenders in the Asia-Pacific and how they can strengthen such stabilize their reputations to effectively deter challengers. This paper takes a tailored deterrence approach and considers how the perceived credibility of defenders affects deterrence efforts in South Asia, Southeast Asia, Oceania, and East Asia. You might be asking, what is tailored deterrence? Great, I'm about to tell you what it is. Tailored deterrence is simply an approach to deterrence that emphasizes developing strategies tailored to a specific adversary, interests, preferences, and perceptions. A deterrence for a military adversary versus a deterrence toward an ally, you might want to try to one-up them on an economic policy. That's going to be two different approaches. And you need to understand who you are deterring and how they perceive strength and actions that you take. A tailored deterrence approach ensures that a defender's credibility, their will to respond to potential threats, and the challenger's perception, all factors receive equal weight in development and employment of strategies in deterrence. Due to time constraints, while we will not be going over South Asia or East Asia, unfortunately, we'll be focusing on Southeast Asia and Oceania. First, Southeast Asia, the name thinking at everyone's lips is South China Sea, of course. China's increased violent actions in the Spratly Islands show that they do not perceive Manila's deterrence as credible. Based on comments from Dr. Bo Ho, who's quoted below, he is the director of the South China Sea Strategic Strategy Initiative, which is operated out of Beijing. It's not state-sponsored, but it is state-affiliated. They have former PLA and general admirals on their staff and everything, so it's not official, but it's official adjacent. China perceives Manila's deterrence credibility as practically non-existent, and the highlighted portion from his quote, "The Philippines is likely the weakest among the South China Sea parties, not to mention to compete with China." So like the fact that like they're so not on par with China that we're not even in consideration in regards to China's interests or challenging China's interests. As China does not feel deterred by the Philippines, it will continue to engage in aggressive actions in the South China Sea. And based on whose argument, only greater US intervention in the matter would change China's perception. And as it would happen, that greater intervention has come to bear. On October 31st, 2025, US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and his counterpart, Philippine Secretary Gilbert Teodoro, unveiled Task Force Philippines. Task Force Philippines is going to be, as I explained in the paper, a permanent joint task force between the United States and the Philippines to have permanent US presence in the South China Sea for patrols in the Spratly Islands and other aspects of Philippine territorial waters. In addition to strengthening Philippines' deterrence credibility, this task force will strengthen US credibility in the South China Sea. This is a comment from a scholar at the Center for Strategic International Studies in Washington. Part of the problem the Chinese have with American deterrence in the region is for exercises like Bo-Katan, they come and then they sail off. There's no permanent presence. And this joint task force is going to provide this permanent presence. Something I want to highlight about this initiative, though, is invitation versus intervention. And by emphasizing the joint nature of this task force, the US can reassure domestic audiences that this initiative is supportive rather than interventionist. What does US audiences don't like? Intervention overseas in areas they do not deem to be in America's best interest or that they personally give a damn about. And by emphasizing the joint nature of this, the fact that the Philippines asked the United States for help, that we are responding to a call from our allies in aid is very important. And this shows that the US is committed to maintaining these alliance networks, which is of particular importance to Southeast Asia. Talking about presence versus persistence. While US security and economic initiatives are warmly welcomed across Southeast Asia, a lack of sustained, persistent engagement in the region has created a perception of a US say-do gap. This rhetoric-reality gap creates the perception among Southeast Asian countries that the US is not a reliable partner. Therefore, they instead develop partnerships with China, whom they deem as more consistently aligned with economic and regime priorities. For example, the US mission to ASEAN is operated out of the US mission to Indonesia and Jakarta, creating the perception that the US treats ASEAN engagement as an afterthought. Counter this with the Chinese mission to ASEAN, which is a separate building and separate office, separate staff that's 100, 120 plus strong at any given moment. Therefore, the establishment of separate offices and infusion of personnel for a separate US mission to ASEAN would shift perspectives and show that the US plans to be a more present and, more importantly, more permanently involved in the region to support ASEAN initiatives and regional security. The US suffers from a similar say-do gap in Oceania. And in addition to this say-do gap, when engaging with Pacific nations, the US comes in with kind of what the US wants from this partnership versus what the US can provide this partnership. And we need to focus on something that is mutually beneficial for both parties. The dominance of security in the US-Oceania relationship, of course, does support mutual China deterrence efforts, but it does not give proper credence to more pressing Pacific concerns, including, not excluding, but including economic development and trade opportunities. No presence, no knowledge. The perception of sporadic commitment is reflected by the fact of the 11 US ambassadorships in Oceania. There are currently November 2025 when I wrote this paper, 6 of them are vacant and have no presidential appointment. That's the majority of them. You cannot say we are committed to this region and involvement in this region if you can't even bother to name an ambassador. Then the lack of US diplomatic presence in Oceania is juxtaposed with Beijing's, who outnumber us 10 to 1 in the region. And this is just one example that I provided. The Chinese mission to the Solomon Islands can support a staff of over 100, and currently, as of, I think, October, has 42 personnel, versus the newly established, as in a couple years back, U.S. mission swings between 2 and 5 people total. That does not say we are present and we support you. Now, some opportunities. I keep talking about this mutually beneficial opportunity, okay? I keep saying the U.S. needs to be beneficial to Oceania, but how can the U.S. be beneficial in terms of economic development? But as foreign aid has become unpopular with U.S. domestic audiences and with the current administration, an alternative to U.S.-specific economic cooperation has been outlined by folks at Center for Strategic International Studies in Washington. This recommendation I talk about in the paper, but essentially this recommendation would enable greater integration of U.S. and Pacific markets, aligning with U.S. deterrence interests, which is separating them economically from China, and Pacific interests, greater access to economic growth. By showing up and supporting such an initiative, the U.S. would increase its deterrence credibilities by offering a Pacific-centered and Pacific-led initiative that is countering China's Beijing-led initiative. And I have different more examples in my report, which you're welcome to read online. But in conclusion, bottom line up front, U.S. needs to emphasize the joint nature of regional collaborations to reassure U.S. domestic audiences that these initiatives are supportive rather than risk-taking. The fact that we are being asked to do this, and as great and amazing partners, we are showing up full force with all support that we can give you. Strengthen perception among regional audiences that the U.S. is committed to its alliance networks by establishing large and permanent diplomatic presence. And there are certain things that I outlined in my paper that the U.S., particularly Oceania, was totally surprised by. And if we actually had someone on that island, we wouldn't have been surprised. And we actually could have done action to prevent such negative things from occurring. And finally, offering alternate economic cooperations to help allies detach from China by offering a country-led and centered initiative that is mutually beneficial to both that country's interests and to that of the United States as a win-win situation.
Thank you.
Okay, so I renamed my paper to make it a bit more interesting and creative. So I renamed it to the Power Play Paradox, U.S. Unilateralism, and the Brittle Architecture of Integrated Deterrence. So, how do flexible alliance networks impact the United States integrated deterrence strategy? First, let's set the stage. So, after the Cold War, the global trend has shifted to flexible alliance networks like NATO. In theory, allowing flexibility in alliances is supposed to prevent the domino-like entrapment of past alliance treaties that led to major wars. In 2022, the US defined integrated deterrence for the first time in their national security strategy, opening a new chapter in foreign affairs policy in the Indo-Pacific. So here's a neat little chart I made about classical deterrence versus integrated deterrence. So classical deterrence defined the 20th century. So the logic is punishment-based. If you hit me, I hit harder. The focus is military mass, tanks, nuclear warheads. It's reminiscent of Cold War, all the nuclear bombs and stuff. The foundation is capabilities and credibility. Capabilities, do you have the military mass? Do you have the weapons? Credibility, will you use them? I think you will, so I will not mess with you. That's credibility. And the structure in the Indo-Pacific is like bilateral. That's from Victor Chad's hub and spokes. Integrated deterrence, that's what we're doing now. It is denial-based. It's about making the objective unattainable and unattractive for the enemy. It's a multi-domain sphere, so we have cyberspace, economic, sea, and military. And the foundation is interoperability and trust. You hear this all the time, interoperability and trust over and over again, and you hear allies and partners over and over again. And we hear allies and partners because the structure is different. They're trying to make a lattice work, not hub and spokes anymore. They're trying to make a lattice work, creating like a united front. And my thesis is that while the United States theoretically is pivoting towards a lattice work of flexible alliance networks, Its historical desire for hub and spokes control creates a strategic contradiction that renders these networks operationally brittle and leaves integrated deterrence as a hollow diplomatic concept rather than a credible military reality. My primary sources include the 2023 U.S. National Defense Strategy, the 2022 U.S. National Security Strategy, the 2025 Honolulu Defense Forum, which I attended, as well as newspaper, NGO, and government reports and websites, plus some South Korean news sources that were in English. The academic work I rely on is political science, specifically Victor Cha's work on U.S. alliances in Asia, as well as industrial determinism as a subcategory of technological determinism from sociology. All right, so old habits. So using Victor Cha's power play as reference, I argue that the US, while engaging in flexible alliance networks in the Indo-Pacific region, they're still hoarding information and not really being a team player. The US is maintaining this historical hub and spokes, in my paper I say like hub and spokes 2.0, model by controlling allies and their access to information. We see this with classified nuclear propulsion technology and advanced cyber intelligence. Also, the aggressive America First posturing sows doubt in alliances, specifically Japan and the ROK, who rely on US military protection. Some examples of this is the renaming of the Department of War, quite obvious, trade tariffs and information retention, ITAR, which I will explain later. This inevitably weakens alliances. So then I did some case studies on the Quad and AUKUS, which are considered minilaterals. The Quad is a non-traditional security minilateral. And the main thing, I don't have time to go into all the details, but the main thing is that in the Quad, India is considered the weak link. They're the ones that don't want to go with the rest of the group. They don't want to be engaged, but that's the benefit of a flexible alliance network. You can choose how you want to engage. But it kind of weakens the Quad because they end up, the pattern emerges that political cohesion is prioritized over kinetic capability. So for example, India refused to patrol South China Sea with the rest of the members to deter PLA. So like that maybe would have been a good idea, maybe not, I don't know. But something to think about. For AUKUS, they are traditional security. They are focused on the defense industrial base fusion and advanced military technology transfer between Australia, the UK, and the US. There are some Australia sovereignty issues that I don't have time to get into, but the main thing I want to point out is ITAR, which is what limits the information that Australia has access to in a military capacity. There's a lot of classified information that they would like as our allies that we are not giving to them. And when we are classifying it, when we're declassifying it, we're still leaving out a large chunk of things that are still classified that they've complained about. And this was a very key point also in the Honolulu Defense Forum. So moving on, the ROK SSN deal, which was mentioned previously. This is the submarine deal, which basically ROK gets SSNs and the US gets a shipyard. The $350 billion investment, that's a lot of money. This solves a core weakness that the US has, is that our US defense industrial base is not producing at the levels we want it to. We're barely meeting the targets. And China is doing 230 times what we are doing. So there's this big gap. So South Korea is coming in and helping us fix that gap. And they're getting SSNs out of it. So this is a mutual deal that ties us economically, industrially, militarily, and politically. So in my paper, this is where I bring in industrial determinism as a concept. And I think it's really interesting, but I don't have time to go into details. But I really like this quote, that production itself is deterrence. So as we see in what I've explained so far, that I believe in integrated deterrence, the US is not being as interoperable as it should be, and it's not being as trustworthy as an ally. And I think this is, it's going back to its hub and spokes kind of model of controlling information, not sharing. And it's not doing the lattice work that it says. I think there's a say-do gap, as Amanda said. So in conclusion, overall, the US is making allies ask, is the US reliable? This question ultimately leads to allies and partners in other countries to reconsider their partnership with the US. This opens opportunities for China. This weakens US integrated deterrence policy, which requires allies and partners as a key tenet. It requires interoperability, it requires trust. From my research, I think the US wants to create the hub and spokes 2.0. When it comes to flexible alliance networks, we're seeing this in America First, aggressive posturing, information hoarding. However, I do see opportunity in deals like the ROK-SSN deal, as I think they shed light on alternatives that require more integration, aligning with integrated deterrence. So in conclusion, either the US needs to shift away from flexible alliance networks into more deals reminiscent of the ROK-SSN deal, or through actions that prioritize building trust among partners. Thank you.
Aloha everyone, my name is Wilson Kang. I am a Nation Studies major history person, and I'm a CIPA intern, and my topic is on integrated deterrence and informal alliances. So what am I talking about today? I am talking about alliances, basically agreements. It could be formal and informal and flexible. Basically, I'm lumping everything that is state relations between states, could be bilateral, multilateral, supernatural. Then I'll be talking about security challenges, traditional and non-traditional, and then deterrence, especially with integrated deterrence. And the bulk of the work would be about US-led informal alliances. I'll be talking about the Quad, the IPPL group, and lastly, the trilateral alliance. So, forming alliances. So, formal alliances are sort of like a very hard rock. Like aspects of formal alliances, they encourage closer collaboration. They enforce legally binding in nature. They are legally binding in nature with treaties. And they also could create a sort of positive institutional inertia. Imagine trying to abolish NATO or the United Nations. Right now, it's hard to conceive, even though there are movements trying to. But the good thing is it makes ideas stick. It makes people want to preserve them. So in essence, they are difficult to repudiate. However, at the same time, most of these formal alliances are difficult to form. The ratification process may be lengthy, as you can see from Sweden and Finland when they accession to NATO. And more importantly, they're not agile, as in legally speaking, we can't do this, we're not doing this sort of feeling. Informal alliances, however, they are not legally binding. They sort of operate like a memorandum of understanding. Basically, two people will agree to do things, but they're not legally enforceable. Because of that, they're easier to form. Also, they're often formed to work on common interests, but the most problematic thing is you need sustained interest for them to run. If one sort of gives up, then the whole thing basically falls apart. So security challenges, most of the alliances are formed or because of security challenges. As you know, we have already talked about traditional. Traditional is always about territorial integrity, the political well-being of the state, and often military espionage concerns. And I will add energy concerns. But right now, we are also facing non-traditional, which could be basically anything. This is not exhaustive list, including terrorism, health issues, cross-border criminal operations. We are now facing supply chain disruptions. These are more important as people understand it right now. There's also the gray zone, which is basically illegal actions between war and in peace. But basically, I'll consider it to be aggressive and often illegal actions conducted by another state to fulfill national goals. A lot of these can involve cyber warfare, can involve sabotage, disinformation and influence campaigns, GPS spoofing and jamming, and harassment. And it could also involve hybrid warfare, which is basically all this above with the use of conventional military forces. Now, this is a picture of the Japanese and the Taiwanese Coast Guard having a little scuffle in their Senkaku Islands. So basically, instead of using warships, they're basically trying to ram each other or use water cannons. But as you can see, it is sort of like a gray area. This is legal. And now, deterrence. So we talked about it. Deterrence is the action of discouraging an entity from attempting certain actions, but Michael J. Manzar of the RAND Corporation said that there are two types of deterrence. there's deterrence by denial, basically saying we're gonna make it very unlikely for something to happen, and deterrence by punishment, which is, as I said earlier, basically we will do something if the thing that we're trying to deter happens. The worst part is it might not happen, especially some politicians do sort of give up after they threaten the war. I think that you all know some examples. But these are more effective against traditional security concerns instead. That is when we came in with integrated deterrence. So, well, Christy can talk about this. So basically, it's about trying to get everything together. I would say the most important part is instead of just relying on military, we're basically trying to get every national power. So basically, like the U.S. military could ask the State Department for help in doing sort of things, and also to invest in high value assets. Yeah. So, U.S.-led informal alliance for deterrence. I'm going to talk about the Quad security dialogue. So this is more of a security-oriented coordinating forum. It concerns a lot of humanity concerns, national security, cybersecurity. Most of the concern is Chinese influence and the growing military strength, especially with their Belt and Road Initiative, the extension of pressure and territorial claims in the East and South China Sea. And for India, its borders dispute with China. We have Russia in there, as you know, for the Ukraine war, and definitely the North Korea for the missiles and nuclear things. I would say that this is highly successful. There are like tangible aspects, like especially in terms of like Coast Guard cooperations to sort of allow military cooperations as well. And apparently the Quad Plus also invited New Zealand, Vietnam, and South Korea to sort of join in and work with them to counter Chinese influence as well. The ITU group is a group formed by India, Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and the US. There were a lot of them is about being concerned with Ankara and Tehran's expansionist policies. So basically, India, UAE, and Israel basically definitely afraid of Tehran. And the US also has substantial interest there in bombs, oil, I believe. This was formed in 2022, and they promised to do joint investments in initiatives in water, energy, transportation, space, health, food security. So the point is to like try to make these nations work together. So in the case that the US did lose interest in West Asia and move to East Asia, they will have something, like reliable partners there to help. But right now, apparently, I think they all lost interest, especially in 2023 when the Gaza war happened. And in truth of the US, right now, they don't even have a State Department official assigned. Like basically, if you look at the website right now, there is no official assigned to this group. So I would say this is sort of defunct right now. Yeah. I would say the American, Japanese, Korean Trilateral Pact is probably the most institutionalized. They actually got together and formed their Trilateral Coordinating Secretariat, and they were trying to maintain US interests in the area. It is also interesting because I would say a friend of mine, he's also a subject matter expert, and he tells me that Koreans and Japanese, they do not like working with each other. And the only way to get them to work together is that the Americans come in and force them to work together. There's actually the only reason why this was actually formed, because you would probably think that Japan and Korea could work together because they both have common security interests involving Korea and North Korea and China. Sorry. But they just couldn't based on past historical events, World War II. They also do a lot of military and Coast Guard exercises and intelligence sharing. There's high-level strategic consultations, and most importantly, America has promised their nuclear umbrella protection. So how effective is it? I think it's very effective, especially if we talk about US and Indian relations. Basically, there is something called the Hawkeye 360, basically a satellite data system for maritime surveillance. And basically for America to basically allow India to purchase the system, it's actually like demonstrates the highlight of their growth, because data, like governments generally don't like to sell data. So by allowing India to access data to help straighten the maritime surveillance is actually something important. I would say that the worst part is right now is you need sustained interest. As you can see, the ITU group, it fell apart because America either couldn't sustain it, or the Gaza war happened, a lot of things. And right now, as you know, with the US not doing unilateral actions, military actions around, we don't really know if these things can still be sustained, unfortunately. And that's it, thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask you all if you could, we have 4 seats for our 4 panelists here, and we'll ask some questions of you, just to kind of have a bit of a conversation. So we'll ask questions about your presentation, but then I also want to and we don't have that much time, but I also want to ask you about some reflections on your experience, working on this project, especially because for some of you, I know that this is very far away from, the actual research interests that you have. And so, really thinking about that experience and how it might or might not have impacted your work and other kinds of things, right? So I do have a couple of questions. If you have questions, you can also feel free to ask. I have at the top of my mind, and this might be a little bit unfair, but of course I'm thinking, because we're in the midst of, this war with Iran right now. And so I was trying to think about what you offered us in terms of trying to think about integrated deterrence, trying to think about, flexible alliance networks. If you saw anything in your research that would, that you could apply to what's happening right now in the Middle East to help us understand it. And I think some folks might have a little bit more than others, right? Like thinking about this credibility and all of that, the fact that, again, US is missing a large number of ambassadors in the Middle East and kind of that thing. And so I'm wondering if you all, after having done this research, have a little bit of a different, perspective on what's happening today than you might have had previous. Go ahead.
Oh, I think that when I think about it, like there are a lot of things more interconnected than we now assume to be. As we know, like Iran, because of that, now we're losing a lot of oil and shipping. But it's also, I like to think that America has a lot of responsibility for arming its allies, and yet at the same time, it also needs to be able to protect itself. So I remember that when the kinetic war was happening with Iran, apparently the Americans have to withdraw one of their anti-missile defense systems from South Korea and actually put them in Baghdad instead. And the South Koreans weren't very happy about that. So it just feels like we are weakening us, well, the Americans are like weakening their posture of other places just to reinforce another issue. And that's been like a recurring issue that America will just look at this section and then withdraw and then either come back or not come back anymore. And it also feels like America just doesn't do enough to either reinforce its own infrastructure. It doesn't have enough ammo. We don't know, I actually don't know why they can't really make enough ammo. But we will look at the Iran war, and then we can also see how shipping is being targeted, oil is being targeted, water desalination as well is being targeted. And it really feels that it fits right into why we're doing integrated deterrence, because it's not about military targets strictly now. Now we can inflict the pain on civilians. Now, like, especially with oil being more expensive, I bet a lot of us would be like, we don't want to fight this war anymore, especially for civilians, especially when shipping and tariffs and
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else want to respond to that?
sorry.
Or respond to Wilson?
I'll just say briefly, like I actually had another slide that was like things I would add to my paper now that I know. So like I would have added to kind of bolster my argument a bit, the capturing of the Venezuelan president Maduro, the Iran war, And also this month there was a comment, President Trump met with the Prime Minister of Japan, and I don't know if you guys saw this, but it was really crazy. But he was basically explaining about like, oh, we didn't tell you about what we did in Iran because we wanted it to be a surprise, you know. and then he was like, you know all about surprises, Japan, and then mentioned Pearl Harbor. So which is, I think, a very poor diplomatic move. I think that is very not aligned with our values. But regardless, I think that these actions show like how Americans are treating their allies and partners, and they show that we're very unpredictable. We're maybe not trustworthy. Like we're doing random, unpredictable things and that we think is good for us, but we're not informing allies. We're not we're not giving heads up. We're not inviting them in with decision making. I just think that what we're seeing in the news is very reflective of how the U.S. is actually behaving in this integrated deterrence model. What we're saying we're doing is not what we're actually doing.
Okay, I'm wondering though, is this, in what both you and Wilson have said, I'm wondering if there has been some kind of shift, right? That, kind of the motivations behind, forming alliances and creating institutions have shifted since World War II, right? And so the kinds of alliances and the approach to dealing with allies has also changed. And so it seems to me, because I wonder how much of what we see now is a matter of, because of the particular administration and this kind of aggressive approach that you talk about in your paper, Anita, or is there something about what's happening in the world that there's a shift in the way that that nations are being challenged, more sort of non-traditional security threats and things like that? Take a moment and think about that. I want to give Amanda an opportunity to respond to the earlier question and anything your colleagues might have said.
In response to your second question, I have more to say, and it is seeing how warfare has changed just in the past decade or so, and alternate security partnerships and what the state of warfare is. I no longer have to have boots on the ground in order to do a tremendous amount of damage, not only to your military, but to your civilian infrastructure as well. And in regards to the blackouts currently happening in Iran, and how that's affecting everyone in the country, not just military targets. And so I think countries are taking note of that in what the United States can do from far, far away. And our adversaries are perhaps, they're obviously taking note of that, but they are building roadblocks to ensure that those things will not happen in their own country should conflict occur. But our allies and partners, however, are seeing that, oh, this is what the US can do. And so if something were to happen to us, how the US could help us in this way. Mm-hmm. And so seeing that we do not, in creating avenues for greater in terms of investment in AI or in cybersecurity and in non-traditional security methods that could be beneficial towards them. And regards to economics, using, if they have a smaller defense budget, using that budget in a way that is most beneficial to their country's security needs. Because they might not be in threat of actual boots on the ground invasion, but everyone's energy grid and electrical grid is under threat. In terms of hacking and things like that. And so how could they use what they have and what they need in the most beneficial way, and how the US can help them achieve that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And in regards to Iran, the decisiveness of that action, and I think how decisive it is going to end, and if it ends very recently, if it ends in the near future, and then that will have a lot in US credibility, and that the longer this is protracted, the less credible we are, versus if it's a strike and done, that is much more credible in regards to traditional and integrated deterrence.
Okay, good point, good point. I think this question of sort of the evolution of warfare and alliances as well makes me think about some of the things that you point out in your paper, Ashlyn, that, you know, this question of resources. And we don't often, you know, when we're talking about the changing resources and changing technology, we're often focusing on, you know, AI and drones and this kind of thing, but we often are not talking about the human resources that you know is necessarily a part of this. And so and of course your case is focused on South Korea, but you know, so thinking about this broadly, because it seems like many countries are facing these kinds of population challenges, how might this sort of play into how we're able to innovate and, you know, actually use technology more efficiently for security?
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is a really important consideration that we need to take that we need to think about, really, not just for countries like, you know, South Korea and Japan that are already facing this fertility crisis, but also, you know, countries that are just now starting to kind of see the effects, even like the US. So we really kind of, like, you know, what Amanda is saying, how it's no longer just boots on the ground. We need to be developing this sort of technology to make up for our lack of human resources. So I think South Korea has kind of this right pathway of, you know, we don't have the population, but while we have it, let's try and figure out ways to use AI and technologies to try and better, you know, life for us to try and develop without, you know, the human capabilities. So it's really something that not just Japan and South Korea need to be focused on and investing in, but really everyone around the world needs to be investing in it.
You know, your paper, I think it was fascinating because, well, for a number of reasons, but it got me thinking, this idea that you put forward that the US should actually invest in Americans who can then, you know, carry out these functions and help to fill those gaps in South Korea. And so, of course, you know, there's a whole host of other issues around immigration and South Korea's approach to immigration, whether or not it would be welcoming of this kind of assistance. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, right? Like, how, to the extent that South Korean officials are actually thinking about this, are they actually thinking that immigration is going to be important? Like, how are they talking about the crisis? I mean, I find in Japan, they've been talking about this low birth rate since like the 80s, but, you know, still nothing's been done. And in the US, you know, with the recent approach to immigration and of the current administration, might be, you know, headed much more quickly towards some of these same issues. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that.
Yes. So in the more recent presidential campaign, if I'm remembering correctly, in South Korea, actually talking about the birth rate wasn't a big part of it. Actually, a lot of the candidates just ignored it or really didn't say much about it. So there is this, you know, kind of push for, well, the birth rate is what it is, and we've tried to fix it, and, you know, maybe it will eventually reach replacement levels and we won't see, you know, this huge population crisis. But I think South Korea is kind of moving past that and understanding that actually we do somehow need to make South Korea more open to, you know, immigrants coming in to try and help us and help the economy. And I kind of talked about this in my paper, but we're seeing a lot of younger South Koreans kind of having a very different approach to nationalism than previous generations did. So it's moving a lot away from this ethno kind of nationalism into one that's more around like culture and values shared with other wealthier nations. So the younger generation of South Korea is becoming more open and more welcoming to immigrants, and because South Korea's kind of understood that this population crisis isn't just going to go away overnight. We need to have strategies put into place to address it now before we do see this massive economic downturn. So they've been a little bit more accepting of opening the country, but there is also the problems with the Hyundai plant in Georgia, and U.S. Mistreatment of South Korean nationals that is causing a lot of South Koreans to kind of worry about, well, if the U.S. is treating us like this, how should we treat U.S. people coming into our country? And so there's a lot of kind of things coming into play of, yes, they need the immigrants, but also look at how the U.S. treats South Korean people who are coming to the U.S. to help the U.S. economy. So the U.S. needs to essentially, create easier ways for South Korean nationals to come in if we want them to be more accepting of U.S. immigrants to their country.
I have two questions. So I think the first question does relate to South Korea. So I was wondering in your paper, and maybe other people can respond if critical technologies is a part of their papers, but with the technology piece, it sounds like the population is going to decrease anyway, so technology is going to get more and more important. I was wondering if you were going to examine certain particular technologies that will have an impact on deterrence, like AI, for example, it decreases response time to conflict. Something that would have been an operation in months would take days, for example. And how would that influence, for example, like U.S.-South Korean relations? Like, would you zoom in on that country and how that might increase interoperability and impact the alliance? That maybe population might be less of an issue, or we still need the manpower to, be with the AI models, for example. And then I do have a second question that I can repeat, after this question, is that with the current events, we were talking about Iran. With that, I was wondering if you, on the panel, have specific regions that you're watching out for. As for example, in South Korea, they're moving the THAAD missiles away from, or there are like speculations. I don't know how confirmed it is, but they're trying to move them to CENTCOM, or the Central Command, to help with the current Operation Epic Furies. I was wondering if you would look at how that movement away from the Asia Pacific might affect defense posturing and resources in the region, as you were also mentioning in the presentations that we're barely hitting the targets in production. So what does that also signal to alliances that we have too? How would that impact our hubs and spoke systems, for example?
Yes. So there does need to be some form of manpower, obviously, especially in the beginning stages of implementing AI technologies and expanding this field in South Korea. So there does need to be a lot of manpower there. And also there needs to be a focus on how to have AI kind of be, geared toward have a humanistic approach, to better, the whole society. So there is going to require a lot of manpower, and especially a lot of highly educated people in that field. And right now, South Korea is lacking in people with graduate level degrees in that kind of field. So especially in the beginning stages, it's going to need a lot of manpower. I don't know if that will decrease as they develop AI technologies and maybe it doesn't need as much manpower. That could be the case, but I'm not sure right now. Yes.
If I could add, I honestly don't know how AI could help. I think that when we use AI, there are a lot of errors there that are so apparently disastrous that we actually use it. It's just no, you're just wrong. Plain wrong. And we know that our government has used it to, eliminate DEI, even do that
ChatGPT basically just gave them wrong answers and they still took it. And I don't really know, like I don't think we're addressing the actual impact, especially when you build data centers. Like from where I'm from, where my parents currently live now is in Monterey Park. They're actually trying to build a data center in Monterey Park, and I didn't even know about it until I got this random email saying, "Hey, we're building a data center there." I'm like, "What? Where did this come from?" And it just feels that we are just going right into AI, and I have no idea how helpful it is sometimes. But we're just doing it because apparently there's money in it, and I'm kind of worried that maybe like a bit out of scope. That it feels like another bubble thing, and a lot of people are basically hoping it will collapse. Me too. But anyways, it's increased my RAM prices. I'm not very happy about that.
Other comments?
I can provide a bit of more information on AI stuff because Amanda and I are doing an internship at APCSS, and we were really lucky to attend this talk about AI, and they like flew in an AI expert just for that day to like present, and then he left. And I will say that AI talk was very scary. He was very scared as well. He was very honest with us about it. But the way I interpreted it is that I view this as another Oppenheimer situation. Like somebody's gonna make the technology, and it's gotta be us. Because if it's not us, then they're gonna use it against us. So, and I know the U.S. wants to use it militarily. I think we've seen this through the acquisition of the failed acquisition of Claude, and then later ChatGPT swooped in and took the deal. But the U.S. wants to have autonomous weapons. The U.S. wants to create a system. Well, when AI is not making mistakes all the time, because like right now it's not good enough. But once it is good enough, they want to implement that into the military and believe it will make less errors than a human will. And then if China makes their own AI thing that is autonomous and we don't have an autonomous response, then we're the losers in that situation. So I kind of view it as like this Oppenheimer thing. Like we're like, oh, like who's gonna get it? So I think that maybe that helps you provide some like context for like why I think there's so much of a push, especially in the military U.S. government side.
And then we're back to classical deterrence.
And regardless of the United States' interests in particular fields, we need to have a U.S. presence in the room because in these emerging technologies, the rules are being made, and if we're not in the room, then the rules are going to exclude us, and that is detrimental to United States interests in any field. And the fact that the post-World War II order was so in our favor is because we made the rules to define it as such. And the fact that we are not there in this AI room. And in regards to China, I'm reading things for another class about China's surveillance state and AI-enhanced smart cities, my apologies, and how they bring in potential dissidents. And they record their voice, they take their fingerprints in a 3D scan of their head, and they track them throughout the entire city via the thousands upon thousands of security cameras in all of these metropolises, and in real time. And in regards to your point about response times in AI, they use AI this is a good use of AI. They use AI as someone has an emergency, and they define where the emergency is and where the nearest hospital, and they're integrated into the traffic system. And so every single light, green. There is no have to maneuver the ambulance around people that are parked. They forcibly, through the AI integration into city infrastructure, make a lane for the ambulance to go. And there's one example. It would normally take 32 minutes in regards to normal traffic. It took them 12 minutes using this AI integrated into the city infrastructure. And so it has that good side, that it has the scary, yes, we are tracking every single citizen in the city, and your phone is tracking you and everything you say and everything you buy and all of that AI infusion. Yes.
We are we're at our conversation is very fascinating, and I do want to ask y'all to just briefly reflect, because we're at the end of our time, and also just to plant the seed. It sounds like we're going to need a lot more sort of folks who can deal with ethics in this area, so you've got your
Engineers to take an
expertise.
ethics class for a reason.
Well, yes, you will have your expertise in Asian studies or Asian international affairs, and so adding some kind of ethics to that, I think, is really going to put you where you need to be. But it just a little reflection from each of you about the work you did, or you know, the internship and what it was like.
I appreciate the broadness of the internship. It allows folks to pursue topics that are to their interests, but yet with enough of guidance to you're not totally dropped in the middle of the ocean saying, write a paper. You're given but versus you need to write a paper about diplomacy, deterrence, and Indo-Pacific. Like, okay, got it. Like that's a broad enough topic that I can work with, and something that's to my interest. And so that was something that was very positive from the program, and everyone was very nice working with CIPA. I'm not just saying that because they're in the room with me, but genuinely, everyone's very nice, wants you to succeed, and then the folks that you're working with, you have enough similarities in regards to your papers that there's a theme throughout the interns' presentations, but enough difference that everyone has different perspectives, of course, that help assist the problems that we're facing.
I think the hard part was when I finished writing the essay on January, and then suddenly I was going to be like, oh yes, this works just fine. Suddenly, the Venezuela operation happened, and I was like, wow, it changed so fast. And then I realized what I wrote, like, it won't make sense if I do not add it in. So I have to say, yes, it does work, but as long as people can maintain interest, and then it was just so unfortunate. And then like suddenly the world just changed, and I just felt like when I read political science people and I read the work, sometimes I go like, does this work ever apply right now? And then when I think about it now, I'm like, hey, my work is sort of outdated by the time this happened. So I felt how they felt. But at the same time, I think there are some things I can still like read, and hopefully people can still learn. But overall, I still think that it was a very good exercise. Especially, I think that when you read about politics, things just change so fast that someone needs to be very reactive about it. So I'd like to thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, it was a very fun and informative sort of challenge. I mean, I am not I'm not very much into politics, and it doesn't really play a big role in my research. So it was, kind of fun stepping out of my comfort zone and getting to, analyze what policy is being put into place, the military, and also to talk about current events. So my research is typically on history and the Cold War. So it was kind of fun, being able to say like, oh, like this is what's actually going on right now, and this is impacting us right now. So it was a fun challenge. And I'd also never written a white paper before. So it was challenging, but very, very fun.
I was really grateful for this opportunity and very excited about writing the paper because, again, I think you guys all shared, this was not a topic I would have chosen for myself, but it gave me the opportunity to research something that is very present right now and that other people are very interested in, and that could help me because I'm in political science, international relations, so this could help me get an internship in the future, help me join conversations about things that I didn't know prior. So I really liked the topic that we were given. Another point I'd like to add is that it was really cool when we did the meetups every month. When we did the meetups, it was really cool to see how we were given the same topic, but how we took very different approaches to it. But we would still chat and discuss and learn from each other and be like, oh yeah, I use Victor Chat. Oh yeah, me too, Victor Chat. Yeah, so then we had similar sources and would discuss same base materials, but then the way we interpreted things was different, and I thought that was just really interesting. Everyone took their own path with this.
Thank you so much. I learned a lot. I enjoyed your papers. Some of them are already available online if folks are interested. Others will be
available. And so thank y'all again for really wonderful work.